Hello. Today I'm going to be talking to you about plots, actions, and events. These are a little bit different than what we talked about last time, because last time we did talk about plots in relationship to story and dramatic text, but in that case I was talking about plots as a large overarching structure for the entire play only. And this week I'll be delving a little bit more into plots as smaller units, like subplots. There are subplots and there are major plots as well. So this isn't talking about the entire plot of the play only, but also talking about some of the smaller plots as well. So plot is just most basically known as the sequence of actions and events in a play. And just as a plot is a smaller set of actions and events than the story it's based on, so are actions and events smaller than the plot that they are used to form. So a plot is a macrostructural, if you remember, that means a large element compared to a microstructural element known as an action or an event. So let's talk about actions and events. A dramatic action is an action taken by a figure, or it can be an uncontrollable occurrence like a tornado or a tidal wave or something. And anyway, it's an action taken by a figure or some kind of an occurrence in a play that causes a change or a new direction in the plot. So in order for something to be a dramatic action, it needs to cause a change. But there are other sorts of things that characters can do in plays that don't necessarily make changes, but they still can create some good dramatic effects. And that other thing is called a dramatic event. So in a dramatic event is an action taken by a character, or it could also be an event as well, like a tidal wave or something like that, but that fails to change the direction of the play or fails to start a new direction in the plot. So plots are made of both dramatic actions and dramatic events. A lot of times people primarily think about the actions, and they don't think as much about the dramatic events. And so dramatic actions create drama through changes in direction or changes in action, and they have a great deal of dramatic potential because of the fact that they cause change. And I think that's why most people think of actions as very, very dramatic. But events are also very powerful as well. They create drama through suspension of progress, and by not making progress towards a goal, a character might find an obstacle more foreboding. And so because they failed to make the change they want and progress is suspended, that can create dramatic tension and also suspense as we're on the edge of our seats waiting for that action to be fulfilled. Another thing to talk about is overarching action, central plots, and peripheral plots. So overarching action is a combination of all the plots, actions, and events in a dramatic text. So we might say that that is the major plot of the play, and that would be correct, because every single thing in the play, every single aspect of the play from beginning to end is contained in the overarching action. And if there's just one plot in a play, then that would mean that the plot of the play was synonymous or the same thing as the overarching action. But there are lots of plays that have more than one kind of plot in them, and so then we start making distinctions between those plots. So a central or a major plot is a plot in a play that's very important to the completion of the overarching action. And without the plot, the major plot, the play could not complete the story. So in Oedipus, Oedipus's search for the truth is the central major plot. And in fact, it's the only plot in Oedipus. But then there are also what are called peripheral plots or minor plots. And these plots are less important and sometimes they can be even unnecessary to the completion of an overarching drama. So in Midsummer Night's Dream, there are those characters called the Mechanicals, and they're kind of a comic group of low-class actors that are performing a play. And their plot is a great bit of comedy in the play, but it's not essential for the resolution of the love triangle, or the love quadruple between the four people, the four young people in the play. So it's a great plot, it's interesting, but it's not really essential to the completion of the major plot of the play. Sorry, I'm playing around with technology here, and I keep forgetting to click back and forth, but here we are. Action sequence and action phase. So an action sequence is a number of dramatic events that are linked together, the largest of these being an overarching action. So every plot is an action sequence. The largest plot is the overarching action, but action sequences are plots. They have a beginning and a middle and an end, and they can be viewed as a complete whole. Within action sequences, there are what are called action phases, and that is a smaller number of dramatic actions linked together in an action sequence. So action phases build up action sequences, and we can go even smaller. We can say that the action sequence is a macrostructure, a big thing that is created by microstructural elements called action. Oh, I'm sorry, let me clarify this. The action sequence is a macrostructure in relationship to the microstructural action phase of which it's composed. And action phases are larger than individual actions and events. So just as an action phase makes up an action sequence, so do separate actions and events make up an action phase. So to clarify, action sequence is a plot, action phase is a series of actions within a plot, but not the whole plot, and then actions and events make up each action phase, and on a larger scale, each action sequence. So there are three phases of dramatic actions and events. There's anticipation. So what I'm getting at here is every time an action happens or an event happens, it's presented, and there can be three phases of it. It is important to note that not all of these phases are always used every time somebody writes an event or an action, and they don't have to all be done at the exact same time. They can be, the three phases can happen at totally different times. But if an action were to have three total phases in it, these are what they would be. Anticipation, and that's the moment when the character kind of verbalizes that they're going to do something. I am going to trap so-and-so. That is the anticipation moment, the announcement of the plan. And then there's the realization. So-and-so attempts to trap the other person. And then there's retrospection. And retrospection means when that character, or either the character who does the trapping or the character who is trapped, speak about the effect of that on them. And this is where a lot of the drama comes out, because it's in that moment that we can see the emotional reaction to the action that took place. Also, though, anticipation creates drama as well, because it creates a sense of suspense that something's coming. Moving forward. I don't know why I decided to call this page The Layers of the Dramatic Onion. I mean, it is about layers, but bottom line, hey, this is a dad joke, and here it is, Layers of the Dramatic Onion. So single dramatic events, dramatic actions, are micro stories within an action phase. So they have a beginning, they have a middle, and an end, and they involve one or more figures. They have a temporal element dimension, so it represents time movement. They have a spatial dimension, it represents space, in which an action and event takes place. And the above is also true of action phases in relationship to action sequences. So the framework of the central and peripheral plots. Action phases are micro-stories within the larger story of central or peripheral plots. And then likewise, central plots and peripheral plots are micro-stories within the overarching action of the dramatic text. And of course, the overarching action of the dramatic text is a micro-story to that ultimate macro story that we know simply as story. That's the big thing on which the dramatic text is based in the first place. So I'm just trying to remind you that there are all these little pieces that make up bigger pieces, and they make up bigger pieces until you have the entire play. And then on top of the entire play, bigger than that, is the story that it's based on. So this is just a way to remind you of the different pieces in the elemental plots. And like an onion, it has lots of layers of dramatic text. All right, so moving right along, unity of plot. So unity of plot can be preserved or disrupted. So what is unity of plot? Well, unity of plot was first spoke about by Aristotle, and it is characterized by being a plot that drives the play from beginning to end. So unity of plot, if you have true unity of plot in a play, it is the situation as under letter A here, that is one single plot. A true, pure unity of plot has only one single plot, like in Oedipus. But we also use the term unity of plot to relate to a play that simply has a clearly dominant central plot that supersedes all other plots. You could remove other plots, and yet the play would still go from beginning to end on account of this one big plot. Unity of plot is most common in closed dramatic text because it's conducive to the principle of cause and effect, and it seeks to tie up loose ends with a logical conclusion. Disruption of unity of plot. This happens when there's a number of plot sequences that are given equal importance to what seems to be the central plot in the play. So the story, in this case, can lose a great deal of logical sequence, and it becomes an ensemble of individual plots or sequences that are more or less autonomous and isolated from each other. So plots in disrupted plays tend to become confusing, and they don't necessarily tie up well, and it's hard to know which plot is the most important, and this is most common in open dramatic texts. Most plays have a blend of the two. Sometimes plots are disrupted, sometimes there's clearly a dominant plot. It's most common to see a play and to know what the dominant plot is. That is the most common scenario. But as plays have moved on from the ancient Greek period, it's also become common to have competing plots. If you read a play by Shakespeare, sometimes it's hard to tell which plot is the dominant plot. And it takes a bit of analysis to figure that out sometimes. So we will move on to open, hidden, and interaction. So as we said, an action sequence, a plot, action phase, the sequence of actions and events that make up a plot, those are all made up of actions. And there are different kinds of actions. And in this case, I would like to talk about open, hidden, and interaction. So open action is when a story is presented through visible live elements. So in open action, it's very clear what's happening because it's actually happening on the stage. So if somebody goes and they smash a table in front of you, that's open action. It happened right in front of you, they smashed the table. Hidden action is when action is presented through verbal or written language. So if you see a play and instead of seeing someone smash a table, we have somebody come into a room and they report to us that, oh my gosh, I was just in this other room and somebody smashed a table in front of me. That's actually called hidden action, because in that case, the action is hidden, it's off stage, but it's actually being described by the person who's speaking. And the good thing about hidden action is even though you don't see the table being smashed, what you do see is the emotional response of the person who's reporting that it was smashed. And then there's also, say, interaction. And so this is an action that takes place in a character's consciousness or body as a result of an event or an action. So in other words, you can have an interaction, something that happens internally within a person, even if they fail to complete an action. And an example of this is in Oedipus. Oedipus fails to find out that another person, in fact, has murdered the king. He, in fact, finds out that he murdered the king. So he's looking for a truth, but he does not at all find the truth he wants to find. And so that's failed. That's a failed event. But he does discover truths about himself spiritually and emotionally, and that is an example of an interaction. So even though Oedipus faces failure and loss on the external level of action, on the inner level he gains wisdom and insight. So that's an example of interaction. Actional discrepancy is a discrepancy between the way an action is planned and the way it's carried out. And this can be comic, tragic, puzzling. In other words, think of it this way. If I determine that I'm going to walk through that door over there, and I start walking towards the door, and then as I'm walking, I slip on a banana peel and I fall, classic comedy. It's comic because there's an actional discrepancy. I planned to just simply walk to the door, and in fact, I slipped on a banana peel and fell down. That is an example of comic actional discrepancy. One of the ways that actional discrepancy works is to create what's called transformation. So in a play, if we see a transformation sequence of actions or events, this is what this means is that there are a series of actions or events that transform somebody based on the way their actions played out. Usually they play out in a way that is different than what they expected. One example I can think of is there's this horror film from the 1980s called Pumpkinhead, and it's set in the mountains, and this guy's son is killed by this other person, and in order to get revenge, he goes to an old witch out in the woods, and they conjure up a demon, and the demon kills this person and all their friends. And while the demon is killing this person and all their friends, the guy who conjured it can actually see and practically feel everything that's happening to them. And so he's very upset, obviously, and horrified. And so that is a transformational sequence, because initially he just wants revenge, and then as he sees the evil that's being played out, he wants to stop it. So that's a transformation that is based in actional discrepancy, and in that case, it's horrifying. It's the effect of horror. So, moving along. Let's see here. Back down. Plot analysis terms. So, just going to end up with several plot analysis terms that will help you talk about and create in your own writing different types of plots and plot effects. Plot juxtaposition. This happens when actions and events in a dramatic text coincide. So when two things are happening at the same time, you have what's called juxtaposition. So if while one person is racing to get the combination to some lock, these cops on the other side of town are driving to catch the person before they break into the safe, then you have juxtaposition, and that creates tension. Because will this person commit the crime before the cops get there? That sort of thing. That's juxtaposition. And then there's plot succession. And that's when one event follows the other and they are chronologically separate. And so Oedipus is a good example of that. One event follows the other and the sequence of events are all separate. There's just one line of action and time is moving forward in a normal way. Play for its own sake is a term that's used to describe the tendency of plays, particularly comic plays, to blow things out of proportion for comic effect. Think of a clown's shoes. Clown shoes are funny because they're too big, right? And that's what makes them funny. Similarly, in Midsummer Night's Dream, so much attention is given to the play of the mechanicals. to the point that they even get the ending scene of the play that it's really, really funny. And in fact, that's one of the funniest moments in Shakespeare is when the mechanicals perform their silly play at the very end of the performance as if they're the most important part of the play. So that's called play for its own sake, playing around and blowing things out of proportion for comic effect. This should say plot function, not plot function. I will fix that later. But plot function analysis means that when we look at plots, and really when you look at any element in a play for the sake of trying to understand the way the play works, we should be focusing on the function of that plot. So if you're reading a play and it's got 5 plots in it, and you're trying to figure out which plot is the most important or how each plot works, and what their you should be thinking about what the function of that plot is in the play. What does it make happen? The mechanicals in Midsummer Night's Dream are there to make us laugh. That's pretty much what they exist for. Whereas everything else in the play is there to either get in the way of the lovers being with the right people or helping the lovers be with the right people at the end of the play. Plot-to-plot impulse is when one plot revitalizes another by introducing, I'm sorry, that should be relativizes, puts a relative spin on another plot by introducing parallels and contrasts. So when one plot parallels and contrasts another plot, that's called a plot-to-plot impulse. So plot linking. Plot linking is the connection of one or more plots to each other in a dramatic text by way of overlapping events and actions. And this can create some really interesting effects. So some of the reasons that people might want to link plots together is to, just for the sake of variety and abundance, like to make things more complicated. In Shakespearean theater, the very having a lot of different things going on and a great deal of variety in the play, that was considered a value in itself. People just liked really complicated plays in that time period. Sometimes plot linking can help shift us from comic to tragic. So if we're in a really tragic situation, we can go to a comic plot in order to have comic relief and comic effect. And then the intensification of suspense or coordination sequences. So you can intensify suspense in a play if you can stop a goal from being achieved, or if you can make us wait before some horrible or funny thing happens. So one plot might be stopped by the interference of something from another plot and prevent the funny or scary or tragic thing from happening, and thus stretch out the suspense while we're waiting for it. Mirroring, repetition, and our accumulation of events. So accumulation of events is great for thrillers, for comedy. We pile things on and it becomes so complicated and we just don't see how people will get out of a situation. Mirroring and repetition, those can also be used for comic effect, but they also can be used to emphasize theme or make us remember important parts of stories. Cliffhangers are created when the end of an act or the end of a scene doesn't coincide with the end of an action, but rather it usually will end with the very start of an action where somebody says, oh, I'm going to try to trap someone. If a scene ends with that decision, then we're all waiting to see that happen in the next scene. That creates that edge of your seat feeling, looking forward to the result of that action in the near future. Latent dramatic action that's down here is action that's referred to verbally before it's realized. This is another way to create cliffhanger effect. At the end of that play, if that person says, I'm going to do something really horrible or really funny or really romantic, then we look forward to that because it's been stated verbally. The action hasn't happened yet. It's latent, but it's been referred to. So that's latent dramatic action is how we refer to that. Plot sequence coordination refers to the way the playwright arranges more than one plot. So Shakespeare is obviously the person that most people think of when they think of really complicated plot sequence coordination. As I said, there are so many plots going on in Shakespeare, but also in lots of other Elizabethan playwrights like Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, other people like that. That was considered just part of how plays were written in their time period. You wanted a bunch of plots going on, something for everybody, and that complexity of plots was considered a value in itself. It was considered an aesthetic beauty. And then we have closed impermeable plots. So a closed plot is a plot that cannot be interfered with by other plots. Other plots cannot enter into it, stop it, that sort of thing. So in Oedipus, that is a closed plot. Nothing's going to get in there. Nothing's going to touch it. There are closed plots in other plays where there's more than one plot. So when you're reading a play, one of the interesting things you can ask yourself is, are there any plots that are impermeable? Usually you'll find that those impermeable plots are very important within the play. One of the reasons they're probably permeable. But important plots can also be open or permeable. So a permeable plot can cross into or be crossed into by other plots. So the plots of the Mechanicals in Midsummer Night's Dream, I keep going to this because we're going to read it, but the plot of the Mechanicals in the Midsummer Night's Dream crosses into other plots. Bottom is turned into Titania's dream of love by Oberon. So the plot of Mechanicals intersects with the plot of Titania and Oberon, and then later the plot of the Mechanicals intersects with the plot of Demetrius, Lysander, Hermia, and Helena, and their marriages, because at the end of the play they actually perform at their wedding. So those things overlap. So plots and their overlappings can be created for dramatic effects, comic effects, tragic effects, and all different kinds of effects. A dependent plot is a plot whose resolution is literally dependent on another plot's resolution. So obviously a dependent plot must be permeable. And so in Midsummer Night's Dream, when Oberon sends Puck to put juice of the flower on the eyes of who's supposed to be Demetrius, in order to make him fall in love with the right person, Puck accidentally puts the love flower's juice on the eyes of Lysander, and he ends up falling in love with the wrong person, and that's what creates all the love problems. So what has happened in that case is Oberon has, walking around talking about Titania, overhears Demetrius being really, really rude, and he's like, well, that's no way to talk to somebody, and he really should be in love with that person he's talking to, so I'm going to have my fairy assistant go and cast a spell on him so he'll be nice to that person that he's being mean to, and a mistake is made. So Oberon's presence, his plot, totally intersects with the plot of the humans that are in the forest in that case. And then that means that the love interest between all those human characters is dependent on this new plot that's created by Puck messing up the juice of the flowers. He then has to undo the spell or put the spell on the right people in order to make all the correct people fall in love with each other. And their love plot cannot be worked out until Puck and Oberon resolve the problem they've created. So that's a whole other plot, and the outcome of that is necessary for the dependent plot of the love triangle or the love quadrangle to work out in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Parodic plots are plots where, and they're often comic, where it can even be a really serious plot in a play, is parodied by another plot in the play. And that happens in Midsummer Night's Dream because the play that the Mechanicals perform is a parody of the love plot that's taking place amongst the four characters in the play. And then we'll talk about, the next thing we'll talk about is secondary dramatic levels in a text. So this means secondary dramatic realities, and two examples we'll talk about are dream scenes and the play within a play. Both of these are important second levels of dramatic reality that are often put into plays. So we'll move on to that next. Secondary dramatic level, the dream scene. So dream scenes are scenes in which we move away from the primary dramatic level of the script, and we begin to look at a scene that takes place in the dream world of one of the figure's consciousnesses. Consciousnesses, I guess that's a word. The dream scene has several purposes, typically. It can tell us a lot about a character, how they respond to things, so the characterization of the character, things that makes that character unique can be revealed in a dream scene. It tells us about plot motivation, the reason somebody does something or takes an action, that can be shown in a dream scene. Thematic mirroring, so themes can get blown out of proportion, distorted, or messed with in lots of fascinating ways in a dream scene. Dream scenes can actually reference theater itself in comic ways. Usually when we have direct references to theater of this sort, it's kind of a funny thing in plays usually. Though it can be tragic and it can be horrific and all kinds of other things can happen with it as well. And finally, it can show the inner emotional processes and states of the character that's having the dream scenes. So dream scenes are plots in their own, and they can fit into a play in different ways with different levels of strength. You could look at something like Wizard of Oz, and you realize that the dream scene of the Wizard of Oz is the bulk of the entire piece. It definitely relates to Dorothy's real life experiences, but the dream scene is the purpose in that play. And by the way, The Wizard of Oz is a play as well as a movie. I should have said film because most of you have seen the film, but it is also a play. It was a play before it was a film. And of course it was a novel before it was a play. Secondary dramatic level, type 2. Play within a play. Most of us have heard of the play within a play. The play within a play is when a playwright inserts a scene into a play in which figures perform a play. So we have a play inside of a play. And this is interesting because it superimposes another axis of fiction upon the axis of fiction in the play. So we now have imaginary characters in an imaginary world within the internal communication system of the dramatic text. And then all of a sudden a bunch of other characters appear and they create yet another fictional world within the fictional world. And within that fictional world, they have their own internal communication system. Now that system can be broke to certain degrees. For instance, the actors in the imaginary play within a play can speak to the other the figures in the imaginary play within the play can speak to the figures in the original play that they appear in, and the figures in the play within the play can even speak to the audience on occasions. And so this does all kinds of interesting things to the axis of fiction and the axis of reality in the moment of performance, because when we have a play within a play, inherently it draws attention from the audience to the fact that they are watching a play. And it basically it superimposes another layer of fiction upon the layer of fiction that is already intersecting with the axis of reality. And as you can tell, strap your seatbelts because this is intense stuff. But basically what I'm saying is it does really interesting things to our perception of the play and reality itself. So some of the effects of the play within a play are that theater and drama itself becomes the theme of the dramatic text. And the play within the play foregrounds the nature of the relationship between the audience and the performance in reality. And finally, it can even disorient the audience by blurring the lines between the appearance and the reality, or the line between reality and fiction. Those things all get messed up when we do a play within a play, especially when the characters speak to the audience. And then you have those moments where sometimes the figures speak to the audience, but then the actor steps out of the figure persona and starts communicating to the audience as the actor. So there's all kinds of different strange things that can happen in the play within the play scenario, and the degree to which the communication with the audience is manipulated can cause all kinds of different effects in fun ways.